Hi, welcome to from management consulting to investment banking. And so first I will introduce about Haddee. So Haddee is an online education platform and to foster a positive learning environment for children from grade K to 12 with the purpose to help the children and the educators. So Haddee offers academic courses such as English, test prep, college consulting, world language, and communication art. And also we provide free webinar, events, internship, and community service opportunities. So at Haddee, students will not only thrive academically, but will also develop skills that will enable them to live an effective life with understanding and compassion. So you can go to our website, it's called haddee.com, or our WeChat subscription page to find the courses. And now, so let's go to the point of today's discussion. So we've invited three speakers, and could you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm happy to go first. Can you guys hear me okay? My audio has been a little shoddy lately, so I'm not sure, but I'll go ahead. My name is Carolyn, and I attended Berkeley. I graduated in 2020, and since then I've been working at McKinsey as a consultant, and I primarily do my work in healthcare and public sector, and primarily in workforce productivity. So if you're interested at all in either healthcare work or consulting work, I'm your person to speak to.
Yeah, I can go next. My name's Kyle. I graduated from UC Berkeley in 2021. I work at Goldman Sachs on the private equity team. So I work specifically with all the private funds where we take money from high net worth individuals and we invest them. Previously, I also interned within investment banking, so I'm pretty familiar with both of these sectors. I sit on the tech side, so I do a lot more of the strategy. But yeah, happy to answer any questions.
Cool, and I can go last. I'm Ashley. I graduated in 2019 from Wellesley, and I work at Jane Street in business development, which is not the trading side, but we basically do everything that including new flows. So if we're trying to do something new within the business, I'll be thinking about all of the factors that go into that, including compliance work, operations work, risk accounting, tax, kind of all of those things, and pushing that project forward. So kind of like project management within Jane Street. I also interned at Jane Street in 2018.
Okay, so the first question is, why did you decide to pursue in the field of finance and consulting?
Yeah, I can take a stab at this one. So I graduated with a degree in electrical engineering, computer science. And I think personally, my passion and the way I view tech isn't necessarily so to just push the limits of what's possible and keep developing machine learning models and stuff like that. I think there's a lot of merit behind using tech to help benefit other sectors. And so I decided to take my background and go into finance. And it's been a pretty interesting journey so far. I like it a lot. And I'm sure, I don't know, Carolyn, if you want to add on.
Yeah, I think what was exciting to me about consulting was, like, I think in college you get this very collegiate environment where you feel like you can work together within a team to solve any kind of problem. And I think I wanted to sustain that as long as possible, honestly. And I think what is exciting to me about consulting, honestly, is that there are so many different kinds of problems that you can tackle, right? I think more recently, like, I've been able to support a health system on like how they're going to build their negotiation strategy with their largest insurance provider, right? But I also get to tackle problems along the lines of like, how do you optimize your nurse staffing so that you're able to minimize the amount of waste that goes into any kind of expenses that goes towards staffing. And I think all these problems are really cool, right? Because ultimately it drives towards like how to make sure that these communities get to maintain the hospital systems that exist within their communities. So I think, you know, there's like an impact portion, but then there's also a problem solving portion. And I think these kinds of things are really rare to get this kind of diversity of problem solving with any other like environment. So it's a really rare opportunity. And I think it is something that is quite exciting that like, later on, I don't know if healthcare is where I want to stay, but at least in the moment, I know I'm making an impact and it's stuff that is exciting to me. So I think that's kind of how I made my decision. But you're young, you get to decide where you're going in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, I guess for me, I wasn't specifically trying to go into finance, I would say. What drew me to the role at Jane Street is basically like the interdisciplinary nature of it. And so the job posting basically says that you would be working at the intersection of, finance, tech, economics, kind of all of those things. And that was something that really drew me in. I studied math and economics at Wellesley, which is also a liberal arts college. And so I think my education was just kind of interdisciplinary in nature. And so I really wanted something that was similar to that. I think Jane Street just happened to be there and had the role that I was looking for. And then once I started interning, I think it really drew me in, and I found that the people that are there and the problems that I get to work on are ever changing and very interesting. As we continue to grow as a business, there's just a lot of things that are happening. And so there's a lot of opportunity to work on important projects. And so I think that was one of the biggest things.
Thank you for the answers. And the next question is, do you plan to stay in the same job and industry?
I can go first. I guess my answer is I don't know, because I think I don't have a very clear plan of, where I'm going to be in 5 years or anything like that. For me, I think usually I'll think out like 1 year, and that's kind of about it. For now, I'm still at Jane Street, and I've been here since I graduated 3 years ago at this point. But I did recently move to Hong Kong to work in our Hong Kong office. So I think that was like my short-term move. And so I'm going to be in the same job for at least a couple more years as I navigate this new role.
I can go next. Yeah, this is a funny question, right? It's like the $1 million question. I think personally for me, I'm kind of at that 2-year mark, so I'm definitely thinking about where I want to go in the long run. I think in the meantime, like we're honestly kind of hitting a recession, so McKinsey's not a bad place to stay. But in the long run, I've kind of been leaning more towards thinking about wanting to go into the entertainment industry, because that's kind of always been where my heart has been. So I have been thinking about, in the long run, making that switch. But in the meantime, a lot of the work I've been doing has been incredibly exciting. So I haven't minded, honestly, staying at where I'm at for a couple more months.
Yeah, I mean, if my boss asks me, my answer is I'm going to be here until the end of the day, for as long as he wants me here. But I think a lot of it, you just have to kind of reevaluate and figure out what you want out of life. I think the main thing is wherever you're working, there's a lot of place to learn and grow. And once you kind of hit a wall where you're not learning and growing as much, I think that's a good sign to kind of pivot into either a different company or a different sector.
I know all three of you said different things in college, so does it matter what you major in, and do you need anything more than a bachelor's degree?
I honestly, I mean, it depends on what you do, right? Like for me, if you want to go into like consulting and then business strategy and business development, I honestly don't think it matters to get something beyond a bachelor's degree. But I think one thing I wish that I did was when I was at Berkeley, I did do business administration as my concentration, and I minored in political economy. And something I honestly wish I did was just like straight up major in political economy, or study something that I was generally super passionate about, because I think it's super rare for a moment in time to get to study like anything to your heart's desire. And so I wouldn't worry so much about thinking about, what is my future employer going to want me to have an expertise in? I would honestly just study something that makes you really excited and makes you feel like in the future you'll be able to be an expert in and delve really deep into that when you are an undergrad.
My personal opinion, I studied electrical engineering, computer science, so I'm on the tech side. But I think if you want to come to the East Coast and work in, private equity investment banking, I think the school you went to does say a lot. So if you went to a well-known undergrad school, I think you're fine. But if you went to, one of those smaller schools, there's merit behind getting advanced degrees, whether that be an MBA or a master's, just so that you can have kind of like that branding and recognition. It's not a hard thing that employers look at, but there's definitely a lot of whether it's alumni networks or it's like you have a lot of other people from your school that you can talk to. There's benefit in going to a big school with a big name.
So for Jane Street, I think we don't really care about other degrees. So, I mean, all of my experience is at the same company. So in that terms, I think it didn't really matter what I studied, and I didn't get anything beyond a bachelor's degree. I agree with Carolyn that I think really college is a chance for you to study something that's really interesting to you. I would say I don't really use any of the things I learned in math or economics, really. But I really enjoyed those things when I was in college. And so that was something I just liked and wanted to do. And so I think that also comes across when you interview and are talking about, the things that you study at school, or you have to talk about various things. And so I really think it's an opportunity for you to study whatever. And I think in all these industries, you have a chance to specialize in things that relate to what you studied, whatever that may be, if it truly interests you. And so I think that's like another push to really study what you like, because there could be opportunity to do something related to that. But I think almost all of these roles, there's straight out of undergrad opportunities. And so at least for a few years, you probably don't need to get anything beyond a bachelor's degree. I think there are opportunities beyond that if you want to either pivot, or in certain companies, you might need to get a further degree in order to keep going up. But that's definitely not true of my case. I think maybe if other people have heard about Jane Street, we also really stress a low hierarchy environment. And so like in that terms, there's nothing really about climbing titles or anything like that. So there's no need, except for if you have like personal want to do anything beyond a bachelor's degree.
Thank you all for the great answers. So the next question is, what internship did you do during college? And how did you get your internships?
I can go first. I don't think there's any like singular recipe towards, having the right internships and that ultimately contributing to the post-grad job you get. Because honestly, as like a freshman or sophomore, it is really hard to make yourself desirable or marketable in that economy, right? Like, you don't have that much experience, and the roles that are available are pretty limited. So I honestly wouldn't put that much pressure, and like just like take what you can get and like get the greatest experience you can out of it. So when I was a like freshman, I just like I interned in San Diego, which is my hometown, and I took this um like not paid internship at this local startup and just try to get as much like marketing experience as I could. The year after, I interned at United, like United Airlines, as a pricing and revenue management intern. So I was helping them determine what prices that they should put their Asian markets at. And that was a really exciting opportunity. And the year after, I worked at McKinsey, and ultimately that's how I got my full-time McKinsey job. But I think all to say that like there's many different paths to get to like the same point. And I think that like again, what I continuously try to get at is like when you're like in undergrad, there's like a lot of room for error and a lot of room to explore what you're actually passionate or excited about. And I think that passion shines through by the time you are recruiting for your junior internship or your post-grad job of like what makes you excited. And so I would honestly like try to pursue like whatever it is that gets you most like excited when you wake up in the morning of like the kind of work that you want to do and the time that you have before like getting more serious about what kind of like banking or consulting role that you want to do.
Yeah, so I came from the tech side, so it's a little different. I think my biggest emphasis and what I valued most during internships was not interning in tech, primarily because my uncle works there and I know they treat you well. And it's a great place to be, you know, when you want to settle down and have a family. But I think as we're still young, like I wanted to try to work as hard as I could. So my freshman year, I actually interned as an electrical engineering intern with Shell, the oil and gas company in San Francisco. And I think that, along with some other experiences, helped me get my sophomore year summer internship at Goldman Sachs. And I enjoyed it a lot, even though it was during COVID. And so I decided to graduate early and work full time there. I think getting internships is a big struggle, however you want to look at it. And there's a lot of different ways to do it, but just leverage the connections you have and leverage your own abilities, right? Like if you're very good at math, and try to find internships and jobs where you can leverage your math skills. Don't be chasing some internship where you're going to be putting yourself at a disadvantage. So I think being really true to who you are and figuring out what you want to do, that's the best way. And then you can always work from there.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what was said. I think for me, the freshman year internship is honestly not super important. I think it's important to do something, but what that is doesn't have to be, you know, your future job or anything like that. If it happens to be, that's great, but I think there shouldn't be so much pressure on the internships so early on in your college career. For me, I just did research at UCSD my first summer. It was unpaid as well, and so it was just working with a professor, kind of doing a lot of things that he needed for his research. And so I learned a lot and it was cool, but it doesn't really relate to anything I'm doing now, right? So I think it's important to do something. What that is not too important because you can always do something else later on. And then I guess then my like other big internship would have been my Jane Street internship my summer before I graduated. That was a pretty standard process for getting an internship. You just apply and then you go through interviews. I would say for a lot of these internships, it helps if you apply through your school portals. Sometimes there are different avenues if you're able to do that. I think that definitely helped for me because I applied through Handshake, which is which a lot of schools I think have, and there's like a separate area. I also would recommend attending some of the recruiting programs throughout the year if you're interested in any companies. There could be diversity programs as well. So I actually also attended a diversity program for Jane Street. That was actually my sophomore year, so it didn't relate to my eventual internship, but I was basically kind of, I learned about Jane Street at that point. They kind of learned about me at that point. And so I think it helped a little bit. Of course, the actual internship process, you'll still have to get through all of the same interview problems as any other candidate, but it kind of does help get you through the first round and often like the resume screen. And so if you have those opportunities, I think they're great as well because you can also learn about the company. Maybe you figure out that you don't really want to be at this company, then you don't have to go through the process of applying and, you know, going through all the interviews before you decide. So I think that's my other advice. I would also say, like, I wouldn't stress too much freshman year. If you're applying to a lot of internships and getting rejected from a lot of them, that's pretty normal. It is good experience though, and so I would recommend doing it just to, you know, get a couple interviews, you know, freshen up your resume. All of that is just good skills for the future.
So I heard that internships at top companies are becoming increasingly competitive each year. So do you have any advice to improve the chances of landing an internship?
You need to start by applying to as many as you can. I think that's a good start. And then a lot of like, at least within Berkeley, there's a lot of clubs where alumni or like people in the years above you would work at these companies and they have the direct contacts of the recruiters. So anytime you have a recruiter's direct phone number or email, it's very easy to shoot them an email with your resume and kind of pass the resume screen, so to say. So I think really leveraging your friends, your clubs, your research experiences, whatever you might have, whatever it may be, it's all beneficial for getting an internship. And once you get one, it just gets easier because you can use that prior experience to get more and more.
So I think if we're talking specifically about consulting, this question differs a lot in terms of your situation, right? Because if you're in what they consider like a target school that's already on the list, your life is a lot easier, right? Because it's the same as applying to any kind of college where by virtue of the fact that you attend a certain school, they will automatically consider you and they'll consider your resume. So I would first get clear on whether or not you are on one of those schools that like any of the major consulting firms like Bain, BCG, McKinsey, Accenture, etc. Like consider by default. And so I wouldn't worry too much if you are at one of those schools because like I think as long as you have a robust resume where it's really clear that you pursued interests that you're really passionate about, you have a decent GPA, you've been performing academically, and you have decent work experience to refer to, I think you have a decent shot. But if you do go to a school where they aren't considered classically a target school, I've had a couple of friends who have gone through this experience. There is a good amount of networking that you're going to have to do. I think you will need to go above and beyond to know who are the key recruiters that are involved in each of these processes. Yeah, that's exactly right. Like who are the key recruiters that are involved in these processes? Who are some like key alumni who have been able to make their way into these firms that you can reach out to and get their advice to make that kind of connection into the recruiting team to be able to be considered. So I think the reality is like if you aren't part of the original target school list, there's an additional barrier that you will need to like jump through, but I think it is ultimately possible that you can get to that point.
Yeah, I would also say like practicing for interviews for a lot of these industries is going to be pretty important. And I think at a lot of schools, you might have clubs that can help you with this, and just working with your friends that are going through the same process is pretty helpful. But of course, like, you know, doing well in the interview leads to an internship opportunity. So I think interviewing and practicing interviewing is going to be pretty important as well. And something else to work on. I think some of these industries have more specific interviews that are easier to prepare for. But I think all of them, there is some degree of practice that you should have before you go in, and just having some answers to standard questions, even behavioral interviews you can prepare for.
Thank you all for the answers. So the next question is, what can I do if I can't get an internship?
So I think if you can't get an internship, and this will also matter by year, right? I would say to like honestly, like don't put too much pressure on yourself. If you're a freshman or a sophomore and you can't get an internship, that's actually like not the worst thing in the world, right? Because that means for that summer you get to spend it however you want. And if that's in the sense of like working at a grocery store because you want to get a sense of like what it's like to do like a minimum paying job, or like you want to do work in a field that you never get to do otherwise, like I think that's actually a really awesome opportunity. And so I don't think that's the worst thing in the world. But if you are insistent that you do want an internship, and you know you've passed like the deadline of all the like applications that are cycling, I would honestly like tap into your own personal network, and I'm sure there's like plenty of parents and adults that like are already at like interesting biotech or like strategic consulting, banking, etc. types of firms that like you could tap into to get an internship. But like I think the point that I'm going to continuously tie back to is that like there's no pressure to get a job, and if you don't get an internship even by your senior year, you have continuous opportunities to mess up and like get a job to succeed ultimately in whatever career field that you want. So I think I would just have faith in yourself that you can do ultimately. But if not, like I mean, if it's something you're really excited about, I would, you know, allude to what I spoke about earlier about like tapping into your personal network.
I agree with all of that. I think I don't have anything to add in on this question.
One alternative that some people do is they do research. I think research is able to, you're able to kind of measure that, and that you're able to think very deeply and theoretically about a problem, which you can then demonstrate in your interviews for these companies, which I think is valuable. So whether that's a research internship, or just research with a professor for free, however you can basically stay busy in the summer and better prepare yourself to have a better shot at an internship the following year, I think that's the best thing you can probably do.
The next question is, what is interview seasons like, and how should I prepare for interviews?
This is a funny question because I sit in tech, but I've have a lot of friends on the business side, and they've been actually helping me prepare for business interviews. So if I ever want to make the switch, I can hopefully make the switch. But typically for investment banking, interview and application season's over a year in advance. So if you want to apply for a junior year summer internship, you would likely start recruiting March to February of your sophomore year for the top investment banks. And then it's just a series of case studies, and then like kind of a lot of how you fit within the team. So if the team likes your work ethic, they like how you fit and integrate, then they'll most likely extend you an offer, which will then translate into a full-time offer. So preparing your sophomore fall, I think, is really big for most business analysts.
So when I was a junior, I took interview season for consulting super seriously. And I'm not saying this is necessarily the right path, because I must have done like 60 case interviews, and my housemate did maybe 10, and we ended up both getting the same internship at McKinsey. So all to say that there's no one right way, but what I do know is that you know, the consulting firms are all in really tough competition with each other, and they're also in tough competition with banking firms for the top talent. And so this means that they've continuously moved their recruiting timelines back. I think right now it's they start recruiting in, I think, July of your junior year summer, which to me is insane, because I remember it was like late fall when I was recruiting. So I'll say that like all the more power to you guys, right? Because they want the top talent. And so although that does give you a more constricted timeline, I think they are really excited to meet you and get to know you and to know your story. I think at least for consulting, if you decide that's something you're interested in, the like bottom line is like getting good at casing, right? And I think everyone has a different threshold of like case preparation that they need to do. And I don't know if this is like knowledge for everyone, but like when I talk about casing, it's like the interviewer proposes to you a like high level business question that the client might have, like, you know, how can I increase my revenue in the next year given these kinds of business challenges? And then you need to come up with a proposal on how to do that. So that's typically how a case goes. But I think that everyone has a different threshold for how many cases they need to do in order to feel comfortable with those interviews. And so I would, you know, early on, like test out a couple of these and be like, okay, based on my own personal strengths, like how many will I need to do in order to feel like I can do this like like I'm breathing, and work based off of that, because I think it really does differ by person and personality of what it takes to get to that point. And I think it's really nice to give yourself the time to get adjusted to that. So I would plan ahead. I would, do the cases necessary to feel like that you're gonna like do really well in interview season, and then go forward based off of that. But I think again, the all the consulting firms, all the banking firms are in tough competition with each other, and I think that gives you a lot more leverage that you're in high demand.
Yeah, I guess to add on to all of that, I guess what is interview season like? It'll probably be very hectic, especially if you're looking for your the internship before your senior year, or if you're looking for a full-time job, because as we've all said, like the schedule for all of these firms is going to be very similar. And so the same time that you're preparing for one interview, you're probably preparing for a number of interviews. And so it's a pretty busy time. And as like recruiting seasons move up, you probably will maybe feel less prepared than because it's earlier in your college timeline. So just keep that in mind. I think it'll be pretty busy for both schoolwork and interviewing. So it can be a lot, but that's kind of just the process the way it is now. I think another thing is just, I think for me, for interviews, feeling confident in kind of, my story and kind of what I want out of things is also very important for kind of crafting the narrative as I go through the interview. And so besides just working on maybe more of the technical things like case interviews, I think for me, something really important was understanding why I wanted to be at this company or working in this specific job, because I think I'm just pretty bad at making that up on the spot. And so having a story and being able to tell that is important.
So the next question is, how is work-life balance of your job? And what's a typical day look like for you?
I can go first. I think work-life balance is really good at Jane Street in general. So, I work pretty standard days, and I've only probably worked on the weekend like 2 or 3 times. Of course, I think this is different now because we're work from home and it's a lot easier to just log on and put in more hours. But in general, I would say for most of my career, I've worked like 8:30 to like 6 basically every day, but nothing really beyond that. I think my typical day varies a lot. So I guess for context, when I went into, after I took the full-time role at Jane Street, I entered into the rotational program. In our rotational program, you rotate through 3 to 4 groups within the span of a year, with the goal of giving you a overall sense of the business side of Jane Street. From there, you get placed into a role, and then you can take the knowledge you've learned from your other groups and bring that into your new group. And you can hopefully bridge the gaps between these groups. So the goal is to become like kind of a connector at the business. So I think when I was going through the rotational program, depending on the group, my day-to-day looked very different. I ended up in operations project development, and that's what I do now. So it's mostly operations projects, but touching a lot of these other groups. So I think now my typical day is I have a couple of projects, some smaller, some bigger, and I'm just balancing those, and then going to meetings with external, internal teams, and pushing projects forward. I would say there isn't really a standard day. There's not like something I come in every morning and have to do or anything like that, because the set of projects that I'm working on is constantly changing.
So for investment banking, like it typically depends on your role, especially. My work day is typically 8 to 6:30. Some of the business people, it's more like 80 hours a week. so a lot longer. But their bonuses will reflect that, so it's fair in the end. Typical day, get in, and then 8 to 9, it's like make sure everything that you currently are in charge of doesn't break, or if it is broken, fix it. From 9 to 5, it's like half meetings with the business side. So trying to figure out how we can better assist them, build out the projects, half finishing developing the projects. And then from 5 to 6:30, that's typically on the tech side when we do all of our production changes so that we don't disrupt the work. And because all of our companies are global companies, you know, you're going to have to take the early morning and then later in the evening meetings so you can communicate with all of your teams. It depends really day to day. The one thing I will note is that if you're working in investment banking, like vacations aren't really vacations. The more responsibility you take on, even if you're on vacation, you can get pinged to work. So a little downside, but overall not bad.
So at McKinsey, I think lately we've gotten a good amount of business since the pandemic started. So the working hours were pretty tough. I would say I worked like 60 to 75 hours per week. And I think given last year was my first full year, I was motivated to work a lot more on the upper echelon of that to really prove myself and that I was valuable to each of my teams. I think a huge resolution this year for myself was that I was going to make sure that I could work in a way that was sustainable for myself and that I was still growing. And so that was really important to me. So while I do still work like 60, 70-hour weeks, I try to institute different types of things within my teams that allow the work to be a lot more sustainable. And I think it's been met with pretty strong reception. For instance, more recently on the current team I'm on, I pushed for us to set team norms in which we have once a week, we have a predictable night off, which sounds like literally you're asking for morsels, right? In comparison to maybe what you're looking for in tech, but like once a week, we get the whole evening off. No one's asking anything of you. No one will bother you, and you get to do that like any like thing you want on that evening. So for instance, this week I went to go to a comedy club with my boyfriend, and so that was super liberating for me. But on like various teams, we also done things where like let me think. Like we try to like make time to like eat lunch and like get to know each other and have like periodic team meetings or team dinners so that we can actually like get to know each other beyond the work. So I think the huge thing here is like I think all of our jobs are pretty high stress environments, and a huge thing to do when you're like a new grad and you're still learning how to assert yourself and what your value is in your work is like setting these kinds of team norms so that like you can live sustainably and you can enjoy your job. So I think that's something that I would push for like in your guys' tenure. And then if we're just talking about the work life balance of my job or like what a day looks like, even in my job, for instance, I think a lot of like the 9 to 5 period for me is honestly like constitutes of client meetings, meetings with the partner or the engagement director of my study to problem solve like some of the major like roadblocks of my work stream, for instance. And then a lot of the like after 9 to 5 hours are spent like, okay, now that I've problem solved this roadblock and I know how to move forward on my work stream, like how do I actually like tactically like fix Excel or fix like my pages so that it reflects that.
Thank you all for
Sorry,
your
I have
sharing.
something
Oh,
to I have something to add. So I forgot to mention that I guess the work-life balance is going to be a little worse in the summer for me because generally I work with the internship a lot. And so a lot of time is just spent on interns and their growth. But you still have to do your normal job. And so basically how you make up for that is you'll have some more working hours during your day. But I think we've typically found this to still be really good because you're finding people that will come to the company, in the next year and be able to contribute there. And so the trade-off of more working hours for me versus, the future benefit from an intern taking a full-time offer is something that we're willing to take. so like, I guess currently my day is also revolves a lot around interns and kind of their progress, their projects, their classes, all of that.
So the next question is, what does career growth looks like for you?
Well, like Goldman Sachs, we start off as analysts and then we move up to associate, then VP. Then if we're lucky enough, we make managing director and partner. And there's a variety of ways to do that. You can either jump around from firm to firm and climb that way, or there are a lot of people at the company that have worked there for like 25 plus years. So it really depends what you're into. And like I said, for me, the way I judge my career decisions are once I feel like I stop learning and growing, I think it's time for a change. And that metric you can kind of determine by just taking a step back from your work and just reevaluating. So that's kind of what I do on like a quarterly basis.
Yeah, sure. I can also add, so as I mentioned earlier, Jane Street doesn't really use hierarchy or kind of roles names. So in terms of that, there's not a clear growth story, at least in terms of titles. I think what you usually will get told is that you get more responsibilities and you get bigger projects as your career extends at Jane Street. I think this has largely held true for me. I think though this is a question that a lot of people have, especially because when I entered the rotational program I had entered was only in its second year. And so there was a lot of opportunity and everything was still getting figured out. I think as the program's grown, there are more people in the program and maybe it's less clear like where the growth paths are. I would say like having those conversations with people is pretty important if it's something that you care a lot about. Being able to have conversations with your manager, I think, is also a skill to have. Being comfortable with your manager to talk about these things. Of course, you have to also balance certain things, right? There is a fear of saying like something that might affect your growth, but I would say finding that balance and being able to have a conversation on these topics is really good in general for your career growth, because then you can understand where you know, upper management might have paths for you and where they see you going, and you can kind of see if there's anything you can change to do something more similar to what you might want to do, or at least see if your values match in that terms. Additionally, I guess something that I've done for my own career growth is that I've moved to Hong Kong. The Hong Kong office is a smaller office for Jane Street. I would say like the New York office is around 1,000 people. Hong Kong's like 150. So like for that, basically, once I've gotten here, my 2 years of experience in the US is a lot, and compared to a lot of the people in the Hong Kong office. And so once I got here, I started to have a lot of some other responsibilities that I didn't previously have in New York. So there is definitely career growth opportunity in certain places if you transfer offices, and but that's not true of all jobs. I think it's something to explore. And of course, you know, some people, it just isn't something they want to do. For me, I feel fine moving, you know, so I have made that decision. And I think it's been really good for my career growth.
So I can definitely speak to career growth within McKinsey, and I imagine it's pretty similar across a lot of the consulting firms. But typically what happens is if you go into consulting straight out of undergrad, you'll start off as a business analyst. And a huge selling point of McKinsey is that you get to make this jump straight from business analyst to a manager role, which I think is typically less common throughout a lot of the consulting firms. But I think that is a really exciting opportunity to be able to be in a leadership role quite early on in your career. And then you make that transition from manager to associate partner to like ultimately partner, which is one of the more higher tenured roles throughout the firm, where you get to actually manage like a client relationship. So I think that happens like pretty quickly, and you can get to that point if you really want by your like early 30s, and that's something you're interested in. But I think in the meantime, there's a lot of other career paths that like McKinsey offers and a lot of consulting firms offer where you could potentially, for instance, go back to business school after doing a couple years as a business analyst. And McKinsey will actually sponsor your entire business school tuition for the entire period if you come back and do that same amount of time as a manager at McKinsey. So that's one option that I think is quite exciting. And then I think there's a couple other options where if you stay at McKinsey at least 2 years, like they'll always welcome you back. Like even if you leave, you always have an opportunity to just come back to the firm. There's a third option where it's called a secondment. If you want to do basically what is an externship, where you are still affiliated with the McKinsey firm, but you can go off to a different company and like work as an extern there, and like just see what things are like outside of McKinsey post grad. That's definitely an option too. And then McKinsey will always welcome you back whenever you want to return back to the firm. So those are a couple different career pathways that you could go down that I think honestly, like don't stymie your like career growth or progression, but like give you a lot of options of like what you want to see out there in the world.
So the next question is, why should someone pursue the same job path as you?
I think this question is good as like a pros cons analysis, right? And I'll do a pros cons for my job. Let's start with cons and then we can end on pros because I think that's a more positive note. Cons are that the hours are quite long and sometimes you are subject to the will of partners that care more about the client relationship than your well-being as an analyst on the team. And it can be quite straining on some of the personal relationships that you have in your life. The pros are that sometimes that is within your control. I think it is within your control to assert that like you have certain standards and boundaries for what you're willing to do as an analyst and you're not willing to compromise those, and that you will produce good work in the time that you are working, but in the meantime you want to live a balanced life. And so I think that like consulting actually allows for that kind of flexibility where if you are bold enough and you are confident enough in yourself, you can assert those kinds of boundaries. But I think the second thing is that like you get to work on a bunch of like really interesting problems that you might honestly never get to work on again, and like never get to work on that kind of diversity of problems again. So like I mentioned earlier, that's something that gets me really excited is that I more recently have been able to focus in healthcare work and public sector work. And for me, it's really exciting to get to work on these problems where you're helping a like Department of Health modernize their IT infrastructure so that they can leverage some of the learnings of the failures of the handling of the COVID-19 pandemic and make sure that they have the infrastructure in place that those failings never happen again for their jurisdiction. Or you can work for a healthcare provider and make sure that they are able to stay in business by negotiating rates that are favorable to them so that like they're not being undercut by super powerful like national insurers, and that they're actually able to like make their case. And I think like being able to like stick up for these kinds of clients and like actually being valuable and like a great supporter in the meantime is stuff that is really exciting to me, and I think a really rare opportunity and doesn't come up in other industries that you get to work in. So I think for a while I honestly struggled to understand, these clients are honestly much stronger experts in their domain than we are. What is the value that we offer to them? And I think the value that we offer to them is to take their deep expertise and like help them figure out how to structure their thinking, how to pitch themselves, and how to craft a strategy that like allows them to succeed when they're operating in a domain outside of just like their own institution.
And that's all the questions for today. So feel free to typing your question in the chat section.
Or we can ask here. Thank you all. This is great. So I have a question. I think we have some high school students as well. Any advice for them other than I shared among all the parents groups, and I see one commonality. It's all three of you went to the top schools. And as Caroline said, those target schools that those top companies they're recruiting from, right? So that's one thing. But other than that, if there are any other fundamental skills, the second thing I see the commonalities, you all three talk extremely well. So any other tips for high school students so they prepare for those big company interviews and job offers down the road?
I can start. I guess one thing is that Wellesley is actually not a target school for like most of these places. So I guess it is a good school, but it is not a target school. So keep that in mind. I would also say I don't have great experience in like applying to a lot of these like bigger companies because it is not a target school. So there is definitely a trade-off there. But at the same time, the alum connection group is like very small. So if there is someone that has worked in the company, like you can probably find them and talk to them. I think every single person that has applied to Jane Street finds my email and talks to me. So like that's just one example. Probably doesn't help that our like alum emails are the same as our student emails. And so everyone just knows what my email is. But in any case, it just means you can talk to alums very easily. In terms of like what a high schooler should do, I think going back to kind of the first things we talked about is to find the things that you're passionate about in college, because like when you have things that you like and you are, building yourself up in ways outside of just a career, I think that just reflects a lot in your day to day. So one of my pieces of advice would just be to find clubs and extracurriculars that you're interested in, and also, pursue the major that you're interested in, because those are all things that can help you have topics to talk about during your interview. I would say like part of interviewing is also just being personable. And so like sometimes when you have these snippets of information, then you can just make a connection with the interviewer. I know I've definitely had friends who said like, oh, I really like soccer. And then I realized my interviewer did too. And, we had a conversation about that at the very end of my interview. And so like having your own interests might just work out for you sometimes. So that's one of my pieces of advice. I think a lot of the other things that we've said will just be things you can work on. For example, interview prep, or getting internships, whether that be internships related to your future internship or just experience in anything. I think that's probably some of the things I would say. I would also say like I did a lot of extracurriculars, and that's also what makes your college experience. I would say don't rush too much into always thinking about your career. College is a very special time. It is a time to make really good friends, hang out with people all the time. I think my friends and I talk about it all the time. Like we're never going to have another instance in time where we're all living in a dorm and, down the street from each other and all of these things. And so don't forget that while you're also preparing for, your future outside of college, because I think that is really important. And at the end, I think I can say that probably everyone will find a job, and maybe it'll be at a smaller consulting firm or smaller bank than you would like, but it's a starting point and you can grow from there. But you can't really go back to undergrad. I think you can go get a different degree, but that is going to be a very different experience. I think a lot of times that is going to be older people and people that have life experience and have gone through some jobs, and there's just going to be a lot of differences. So just cherish college is what I would say, especially as a person that has been out of college the longest out of the panelists.
Thank you.
I have a very strong answer, or answer that I thought about for a while for this question actually. So I think growing up as an Asian American woman, something that has been my tendency is that I think to be able to answer any question, I need to have an extremely strong fact base. I need to be prepared to like the nth degree to be able to like have the right to speak to this question or like speak to anything. And I actually think there's a ton of merit to actually just like having faith in yourself and having confidence in yourself that like even if you don't know the 100% answer to any question, just being able to and willing to speak to that. I think that's not something we often like learn as a high schooler, and it like really makes an impact later on in your career, right? Because it plays a role, like for instance, once like you know you're speaking to a client that has much more expertise in a certain area that you might not have, and it plays a role in like when you're like fighting for the compensation that you feel like you deserve in your job. And so like all these things make an impact for like how you are perceived as a valued like expert or like valued person in your role. And so I would honestly start working on these kinds of things when you're in high school. So like being willing to speak and like improvise on the spot on like things that you don't feel like you're an expert on, like you know thinking about like what are you really like talented in and what are your strong qualities, and like building that kind of confidence and like faith in yourself, because I just think those kinds of things are better done when you're younger and when you have a playground to like mess up and like you know build up over time than like when you're actually in the workplace and you know there are stakes involved and you need to build these skills for the first time. And so if I could go back in high school, that's actually something I would build for myself, because that's much more core to who you are as a person and will matter like when you're in the working world than like just getting the right internship, because there's so many more opportunities for that and there's much less opportunities for like when you're younger learning to have faith in yourself. So I think that is something I would think really seriously about like making the opportunities to build that skill when you're younger.
Yeah, just to add on to that really quickly, I think I spoke with a partner at Goldman Sachs the other day, and he gave me some very good advice. What he said was, when you walk into the room, you're always going to be viewed as an Asian American, and it's not your job to be anything else. But know that with the stigma of being, you know, an Asian male, there are pros and there are cons. The cons are they expect you to be quiet and to do your work diligently, and it's your job to break that norm, right? So whether that be in a client meeting and speaking up and speaking your voice, that's important. But also at the same time, if I go to a client and I say, for this transaction, we're making 5 bips at 25% interest, nobody's going to question me, right? That's the pros to the stigma. So you can utilize both the pros and cons, know your pros and cons, and work on that. But I think as a high schooler, the best thing you can learn is to develop confidence with humility. I think this is a very hard balance to find. You need to be confident enough in yourself where you can go up to anyone, and whether you're talking about something, be confident enough in yourself to not succumb to what they might instill on you. But at the same time, you need to know when you are wrong and when you can listen to people who can teach you things. And I think throughout college, that's something you learn. And the earlier you learn that, the better.
But just a slight thing off of Carolyn's point, I do think if anybody's interested in a women's college, I think it's a great place to learn more about yourself and really build up those skills, especially as a woman in the workplace. I think my sense of self and kind of all of these things definitely took a turn for the better at a women's college. Although I did not go to Wellesley because it was a women's college, it was for other reasons. But if that is something you're interested in, you can also feel free to talk to me about that.
Wellesley is very highly regarded college, actually. It's a rich school for all the students. So anyway, yeah, I don't know whether everybody understand or really get what your major actually, and all of you can just say it very quickly, because most high school students are concerned what they want to study in college.
Sure. I studied mathematics, but like abstract math, so like proofs and all of that, not applied math, and then also economics. Yeah, but I guess it wasn't really, as like we said earlier, like not that important in my day-to-day career.
I studied business administration. So I was in the law school at UC Berkeley and I minored in political economy. Again, I think this is an area where I would push for you to like, if you have the opportunity, just like study something you're interested in undergrad. I like, you have a lot of opportunities for like majoring in business in MBA. So that's what I've learned in my retrospect, and you guys can leverage that knowledge too.
Yeah, I studied electrical engineering and computer science in college, but a lot of the activities I did were focused around business and finance.
Okay, so yeah, I guess there's, a lot of us want to study CS. Both my children are studying CS at Berkeley. So what I'm trying to make a point is that you don't really have to study CS to get all the top jobs in the top companies. And I think McKinsey, you guys hire a variety of the students, variety of majors, right?
No, I think it's really cool. Honestly, it gives you an edge if you do a major that like isn't typically heard of. I have a lot of friends who study like history or like I think there's a major at Harvard about like medicine throughout history. I'm definitely butchering that, but like these kinds of like really interesting like areas of expertise that I think people can actually get a sense of like, oh, this is something you're actually interested in,
That's awesome. That's great. Thank you. Ivy, and you have any questions? Are we trying to wrap up? I know it's dinner time. Kai's in New York and Caroline's in San Francisco. Ashley's in Hong Kong. So Ashley's tomorrow is Sunday, so that's okay. And Ivy's in New York. So Ivy, do you have more questions or questions from the audience?
I think we basically covered all the questions in the chat section. And thank you all for attending.
Whoa, yeah, a few minutes over. Thank you so much for your help. And it's the second time Caroline and Kyle helped us. And we have a YouTube from last year, why Berkeley, why not Berkeley? Thank you all. Thank you, Ashley. Nice meeting you the first time. Or second time. I think you were in my house before, many years ago. Thank you. Enjoy Hong Kong. Enjoy the food. I'm jealous.
Thanks.
Yeah, good. Okay, we're done. Thank you, guys. Caroline, thank you. And for accommodating.